I adore the Dragon Quest series, but this deep slimy love I have for it comes much more from the spin-off games like Rocket Slime and Dragon Quest Builders than it does any of the numbered titles in the game. Who knows, they might all change when 11 comes to Switch. But we're not here to talk about Dragon Quest 11, we are here to talk about Dragon Quest Builders 2. Destruction God Malroth and the Empty Islands, which is a mouthful of a title. However, it is only in Japanese at the moment, so it's quite likely that it'll change by the time it comes here. It might even just drop it all together and be called Dragon Quest Builders 2. However, it might not change. Dragon Quest games quite often have a lengthy title to them, and if Breath of the Wild has taught us one thing, it's that the name of your game doesn't really matter. The game is coming to Japan on December 20th, but we do not have a release date outside of Japan as of yet. The last game, Dragon Quest Builders 1, took 9 months to get from Japan to elsewhere in the world. So at this stage, we don't know how long we'll really be waiting. The good news is that there is a demo on the way to Japan, and as most of you probably know at this stage, it's quite easy to create a Japanese account on your Nintendo Switch and download the demo so you can try it. Now the demo is expected to come out before launch, however they are saying that they're going to finish the game before they get this demo all ready, so I expect it to be much closer to launch than the time of this video going up. The idea behind this video is I'm going to recap you on a bunch of the stuff that we now know about the game to give you an idea of what's changed, and a lot has actually changed. They've really taken the original formula, looked at what was wrong, what they could improve on, and made big improvements in a lot of areas that I say really needed it. Now, before we talk about Dragon Quest Builders 2, we've actually got to talk about 1 a little bit here for people who didn't play this first game in the series. So, the first game is mechanically, or both of the games are mechanically like Minecraft. However, they play a little bit more like an RPG with leveling up mechanics and a much more focus around town building than anything else. My one bit of advice here is that if Minecraft wasn't your type of game, this still actually might be, because for me, I got a very different experience out of this than I did Minecraft. Anyway, let's talk about what is new in Dragon Quest Builders 2. First of all, the game now has multiplayer that supports up to 4 players. I don't believe this has anything to do with split screen, but you can connect 4 switches together or even just go online and play with 4 players together. I think the funny thing about this is the first game, obviously Dragon Quest Builders 1 didn't have the multiplayer, and now that 2 does, it's kind of following the tradition of the original Dragon Quest to Dragon Quest 2. The original Dragon Quest game back on the NES actually didn't have party members. You were just a single character going through that game, and then when it went to Dragon Quest 2 is when it expanded itself into being a party of characters. I don't think this was at all intended by the developers, but it's kind of one of those things that worked out really well for them. I generally like playing games with my partner or in multiplayer, but I think this one here I'm going to stick to playing single player, simply because, as I mentioned before, Dragon Quest Builders plays much more like an RPG or JRPG, and I get that type of single player experience out of it. I don't need someone else in my world while I'm trying to experience that. The next big change I have here is some of the movement systems. So first of all, you can actually sprint in the game, which in the first game, it took a long while to kind of get around when you're only walking around everywhere. But in this game, there's literally a button you can hold down just to sprint around. Another big addition here that was actually introduced in the original Dragon Warrior 2 as well was the glider. And now this is a Breath of the Wild style glider, so when you're in the air, if you press a button, you can kind of just float down around. Instead of in the first game where you just drop to the ground and you actually take full damage, so you take quite a lot of damage and die a lot of the time from doing this. And in this game as well, they've actually increased the height that you can build up to, so you can actually get up really high, meaning that it may be a tactic to build big towers to kind of get your way around the map faster. And one more thing as far as movement goes, they actually added the ability, this one's really surprising, to go underwater, because in the first game, as soon as you went into water, you just kind of dropped down. It was like dropping into a pit in Mario. That was it, and then you spawn back on the edge. In this game, they actually have added an underwater area. I guess similar to Minecraft again, if we're going back to those comparisons, where you can just swim around underwater and explore quite deep down. I think it's like 100 blocks down or something like that. Now getting into the tools and collecting side of it, the mining tools and the button for actually using your weapon are now on separate buttons, meaning that you're not constantly swapping between the two every time an enemy pops up to the next time you're going to go mining. And as you're going to notice, it's just one of those things that as I go through these, you're going to go, well, that kind of could have been in the first game, but there's a lot of improvements that they're making here just to make this game a lot better, including swinging your mallets and swords and things like that a lot faster. It just speeds up the process of mining and killing enemies and makes the combat feel a little bit more fast paced, because it could feel a little bit slow in the first one, especially when you had to get out of the way of enemy attacks. And since there's no dodge roll, you really kind of got to move around fast. Then going back to the swimming and water mechanics, it actually acts, like I said, similar to Minecraft in the fact that you can make a source location for water. So you actually pick up a bottomless jar at some point in the game, and with this jar you can just put water wherever you want, and it's just going to start flowing out from that point. And you can use the same jar to pick back up that water. The waterfalls that you can create with this, you can even use as a way to kind of swim back up the waterfall to get to higher locations, and I think that's kind of clever. Now moving on to world with some big changes that I'm so glad they added to this one, and the first one is a world map. Now you could zoom out in the original game and have a look around you, but you can never really see that far away. In this one they literally added a world map so you can see everywhere that you've been on this map so far. And the best thing about this new world map is the warping system that again is similar to Breath of the Wild, and the more I think about some of the things they've added here, the more I think they've just literally gone back to the drawing board and said, what did Breath of the Wild do right? And yes, I know Breath of the Wild wasn't technically the first game to add warping systems, but it's certainly a welcome change in number 2, as you're constantly backtracking and heading back to town all the time. One of the more interesting changes that I've noticed here is that you can actually go into first person mode. I'm not really sure if it's something that anyone really wanted to do, but it's kind of cool that they've added it. And who knows, maybe they have some sort of VR support in the future. A bit of an interesting change for those of you who played the first game, you might remember the towns were basically how you leveled up. As you built more and increased your town leveled up, and that was part of kind of completing that area in the story. In this, there's more ways to level up. So you actually do get EXP for defeating enemies, and I'm guessing this is one way of increasing your health and maybe your attack in this game. Then obviously you still get your town EXP, and then there's also a heart system, so with completing quests or doing things with villagers, they're going to drop hearts that you can just run around and pick up. How each of these will play into the gameplay, as I mentioned, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm kind of glad they've added a few more systems into this. Speaking of systems, the building system has taken a little bit of a revamp here as well. First of all, they've introduced sloped tiles, meaning that you can actually use a hoe for some of the softer tiles to make them into slopes. Which is just great because not everything has to be jumped up, or you don't have to build stairs everywhere. Then one of the massive improvements that I'm really surprised Minecraft hasn't thought of something like this yet is the way that you can actually build rows of blocks. In other words, when you go to the original build location of a block, it seems that if you hold down the build button, it'll keep building a row up from that spot that you initially started building. So you don't have to put each one down individually. It's a bit hard to explain, but it seems to be something that will be quite intuitive when you're actually doing it, and should make building things like walls and your actual castles a lot easier. One more big change as far as building is that you can craft set amounts of items now. It's a bit of a silly thing that was in the original game again, was that when you went to craft items, you were either making one or you were just making all of them. There wasn't like an in-between. Where this, you seem to be able to select how many items you want them to make, and then simply just have them make that amount of items. I think that's most of the big details gone through here. There are other little things like the caves are now big expansive areas instead of these little pokey locations they used to be. There's farming in the game. You can pick up blocks and just place them down at another location without putting them in your inventory. Just a lot of kind of other small changes that aren't that important and aren't really worth going through in a video like this. Anyway guys, thank you for watching. Why don't you let me know what you're thinking about Dragon Quest Builders, or maybe Dragon Quest 11 if you're not that much into the Builders series. And remember, like button, subscribe button, you do you, and for everything Nintendo, stay tuned to Nintendo Everything.
ふわふわなので、
結構ふわふわなんで、
あるね。本当に
あ、これなんか写真映えしますよこれ。今チャンスかもしれない。
皆さんどうぞ。
ビルダーです。ちょっと撮ってきました。でね、これよく見るとね、ほら、スライムがいたりとか。